The morning I lost my baby, my husband was in another country holding a different woman's child. He never called. Not once. And I never said a word. I just waited. 6 months, 3 bank accounts, and 1 wedding later, he finally understood what his silence cost him. But here is the part nobody talks about. What I felt walking out of that venue was not what I expected. The morning my water broke, I reached for my husband and found cold sheets. Not just cold like he had never been there at all. Cold like that side of the bed had been empty for longer than 1 night, and I had simply not let myself feel it until that exact moment, when my body was doing the most terrifying thing it had ever done, and the one person who was supposed to be beside me was not there. I called his phone. Once. Twice. 7 times. Nothing. I drove myself to the hospital. 31 weeks pregnant with twins, contractions 4 minutes apart, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and the only thing moving through my mind was not the pain. It was the look on his face the week before, at dinner, when I had asked him why he smelled different. He had smiled. That full, unhurried smile I had loved for 5 years. Then he said, "New cologne, Josie. Don't be dramatic." He was not wearing new cologne. But I did not know that yet. Not fully. Not in the way that permanently rearranges a person. What I found out inside that hospital room was not 1 thing. It was 3. And the 3rd thing is the reason I am telling you this story today. If you are new here, welcome to Afri-Seoul, a channel built for stories that don't flinch. Stories about women who chose themselves when everything around them expected them to disappear. Please subscribe and turn on that notification bell. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to this community we are building together. Now let me take you back to where this really began. I met Josie at a cultural exchange event in Atlanta on a Thursday evening in September, 8 years ago. I was 26 years old, wearing a dress my grandmother had sewn for my college graduation, slightly too formal for the occasion. Standing beside the jollof rice station, trying to explain to a Korean graduate student why the tomato base was not the same as tomato soup. He walked over because he was curious about the food. He left 2 hours later with my phone number. Josie was everything that felt new at 26. He was careful with his words in a way that felt like respect. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. My grandmother, who had spent 71 years surviving things I could not imagine, looked at him across the Sunday dinner table one afternoon, watched the way he held his chopsticks beside her silverware without any self-consciousness, and said, "Baby, that man is comfortable in his own skin. That's rare." She was right about that part. She was also right 2 years later when she pulled me aside the morning of my wedding and said quietly, "Josie, make sure he shows up for the hard things. Not just the easy ones." I smiled and told her she worried too much. I was wrong about that. We were married on a Saturday in March, 5 years before the morning I found cold sheets. Small ceremony. Intentional. Beautiful. His mother flew from Seoul and cried the entire way through. My mother made her famous red velvet cake because she said, "Josie, you do nothing traditionally, and that is not an insult." We had both the cake and his mother's homemade siki on the same table. 2 cultures sitting together without ceremony, without explanation, because that was simply what our life looked like. For 2 years, it was genuinely good. 3 years in, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way I could point to clearly. It was small, the way a crack in a wall starts as something you tell yourself is just the house settling. Josie started working later. Traveling more. He set a password on his phone for the first time in 3 years of marriage. When I asked about it, he said it was a new IT policy at work. I nodded. Told myself I was reading into things. He told himself he was keeping the peace. It was not the peace he was keeping. It was the lie. The trips to Seoul became more frequent. For times in 1 year, when before it had been once. Money moved to an account I didn't recognize. He called it a family investment. His cousin's business. I believed him because I had no reason yet not to, because 5 years of a man showing up and calling when he said he would call had built something in me I hadn't examined closely enough. Trust, when it is exploited, does not feel like stupidity. Not at first. It just feels like love doing exactly what it is supposed to do. I found out I was carrying twins on a Tuesday morning in January, 7 months before the morning my water broke. I took 3 tests. All 3 agreed. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for 11 minutes, not from shock, but from something I did not have a word for yet. Something between joy and a quiet, unnameable dread. Josie was in the kitchen making doenjang jjigae, that fermented soybean paste stew his mother had taught him. The smell of it always meant he was in a good mood. It meant Sunday mornings and slow hours and the version of our life I had fallen in love with. I told him. He put down the spoon. He turned around. And his face, I need you to understand this, his face was not pure joy. There was joy, yes. But beneath the surface of his eyes something else moved, something that looked, for just a half second, like panic. He told himself it was the surprise of the news. It was not the surprise. He held me, said he was happy, kissed my forehead. And I told myself I had imagined the panic because I wanted so badly to believe we were stepping into something new and good together. I had not imagined it. And in 6 months I would understand exactly what that panic meant. The pregnancy was not easy. My body, carrying 2 lives, demanded everything I had. Josie was present in the way a man can be physically in a room while being somewhere else entirely in his mind. He attended 4 of my 6 prenatal appointments. Said work was hectic. I stopped asking him to explain. My grandmother came to stay with me for 3 weeks in my 7th month. She made pot liquor soup with cornbread and sat beside me at the kitchen table and taught me how to oil my scalp the way her grandmother had taught her, slow circles with warm castor oil, and she talked about her own marriage, the things she had swallowed and the things she had refused to. A woman's grief, she told me one afternoon, is not weakness. It's inventory. You are taking stock of what was taken from you. I did not know then why those words settled so deeply. She left 1 week before my water broke. I wish she hadn't. The morning it happened, a Thursday in August, contractions came at 4 in the morning. I reached for Josie. Cold sheets. I drove to the hospital, calling him between contractions. 7 calls. All ignored. They rushed me in. The medical team moved around me with that specific, terrifying efficiency that tells you something is wrong before anyone says a single word. My first son arrived at 4:52 in the morning. Small. Quiet for a moment that lasted a lifetime. Then he cried. And I cried. And I reached for him with everything I had left in me. My second son was delivered 4 minutes later. And the room, which had been loud and urgent, went very quiet. A different kind of quiet. The kind that tells you something before you are ready to hear it. I lost my second baby at 5:01 in the morning. I held him once. Just once. I looked at his face, this small perfect face that had not had a single day in this world, and I named him in my heart because no one else was there to name him with me. I named him Eli. It means my God. And in that moment it was the only word I had. The nurses were kind. Gentle. They gave me time. And then the television in the room turned on by itself. An accidental brush of the remote in the chaos. It came on to a lifestyle entertainment channel. A segment filmed at a hospital. And there was Josie. Not here. Not beside me. Not holding my hand or naming our children or watching me survive the unsurvivable. He was in a hospital room in Seoul. Laughing. That full, unguarded laugh I had known for 5 years. He was standing beside a woman in a hospital bed and she was holding a newborn. His hand was on the infant's head with a tenderness I recognized, because I had been the recipient of that tenderness once. The woman was Hoon Shin, 28 years old. The only daughter of Shin Dae-won, one of the most powerful men in South Korea, with business interests spanning 12 countries. She was quietly, certainly beautiful. She had no idea Josie had a wife. Her family had no idea. Because for 3 years, Josie Beck had been constructing a version of himself that was single, available, and completely devoted to their daughter. He told himself he was managing 2 lives. He was managing nothing. He was simply lying. I watched the screen for 47 seconds. I counted. I was already, even in that room, even in that grief, beginning to document. To store things carefully. Something in me knew. I turned the television off. I looked at my living son in my arms, this small miracle who had made it when his brother hadn't. I named him Noel. It means born at the right time. Because even surrounded by the wrong circumstances, he had arrived exactly when he was supposed to. I did not cry for myself that day. I did not have the space to. I was too busy becoming something new. What happened in the 6 weeks after that hospital room, I have never told anyone in full. Not my mother, not my grandmother, not my closest friend. But I am going to tell you. Because you need to understand that the woman who walked into that wedding was not the same woman who drove herself to that hospital alone at 4 in the morning. When I came home with Noel, I slept for 2 days. Not from peace. From sheer physical depletion. My body had done something extraordinary and terrible in the same 12 hours, and it needed time to understand what had happened to it. Josie called on the 3rd day. Once. I did not answer. He sent a message. I heard about the baby. I'm coming home. He used the singular. The baby. As if I had lost one thing and not a person. As if the thing I had lost was a setback. I put the phone face down. I fed Noel. I thought about what my grandmother had said. Inventory. I spent the next 2 weeks taking stock. I went through every account, every document, every shared folder. Josie had always been careful, but careful people still leave things behind, and his mistake was believing I was too in love with him to ever look. I found hotel receipts in a shared cloud folder he had forgotten about. 14 trips to Seoul in 2 years, against the 6 he had told me about. The math was not complicated. I found Hoon's name in an email chain that had been partially deleted. And in one message, 7 sentences long, he called her the Korean word jagiya. He had called me that word once, in our 2nd year of marriage, on a quiet Sunday in our kitchen. I had asked him what it meant. He had said, "It means you're mine." He told her the same word. I was certain of it. I did not break anything. I did not cry. I sat at our kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down every number, every date, every account. In the margins, I wrote my grandmother's words again. Inventory. There was one more thing I found. Something I hadn't been looking for. Something that made every other piece of evidence feel small. I will tell you what it was. But first you need to understand what I did with everything else. I contacted a lawyer on a Monday morning. I told no one. I sat in her office with Noel in a carrier on my chest and laid out every document, and she looked at me the way people look at you when they understand you did not come to be comforted. I then went to the bank. I withdrew every amount I was legally entitled to from our joint account, everything we had saved across 5 years of a shared life. I was not stealing. I was collecting what was mine. The lawyer had been very clear about what was mine. I went home, packed 2 bags for Noel and 1 for myself, found his passport, his business certificates, the property title documents we co-owned, the copies of his financial agreements. I packed those too. I left him the furniture. I left him the kitchen. I left him that pot he made doenjang jjigae on Sunday mornings. I locked the door. I did not look back at the building. I moved into a small apartment 20 minutes away. Cream-colored walls. A window in the kitchen that faced a tree. It was the first space that was completely mine in 5 years, and I stood in the empty living room with Noel in my arms, and I said out loud, to nobody, "We are going to be okay." Not because I believed it yet, but because I needed to start practicing the sentence. Now, I need to tell you the thing I found that made everything else feel small. Among his documents, tucked inside a folder within a folder, was a letter. Written in Korean. Handwritten. I had learned enough Korean across 5 years of marriage to understand the emotional register of sentences. I took it to a translator the following morning. It was a letter Josie had written to Hoon's father, Shin Dae-won, 3 years before. In it he described himself as a free man, unburdened, ready to be a worthy partner for the Shin family's daughter. Written deliberately, intentionally, sent to a man of enormous influence to open a door. He had not stumbled into an affair. He had designed it. Built it alongside our marriage like a second house he planned to move into when the timing was right. He told himself our marriage was the temporary arrangement. It was not. We were legally bound. And I was going to make sure the entire world knew it. This is Afri-Seoul, And if you have been watching this story and something in it has reached you, if any part of Josie's journey has felt familiar or necessary, please subscribe to this channel right now. Every subscription helps Afri-Seoul grow and reach more people who need to hear that survival does not require your silence. Subscribe, share this video, and help this community find the people who need it most. Now let me tell you what happened at that wedding. 6 months and 4 days after I left our house, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice. Careful. Measured, the kind of measured that is practiced from childhood. My name is Han Shin. I believe you are Josie Beck. I was quiet for a moment. I am. Technically, I still am. Another pause. He told me he had never been married. I know. I have been trying to find the right way to contact you for 3 weeks. How did you find me? My father's people are very thorough when they discover they have been deceived. I understood then. The Shin family, powerful and humiliated, had done their own investigation and found what was always there to be found. She asked me one question. Are you still legally his wife? Yes. The pause that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted those 2. The wedding is Saturday at 2 o'clock. Jade Garden Venue, Midtown. My father would like you to know this. I appreciate that. I am sorry for what he did to you. I looked at Noel and his bouncer across the room, 6 months old, learning to grab things with his small hands, discovering that the world responds to his reach. I am sorry for what he did to you too. She hung up, and I sat with that conversation for a long time. Because Han Shin was not my enemy. She never had been. She was a woman who had loved a man who built a cathedral of lies and invited her to worship inside it. Afri-Seoul had not just betrayed me. He had deceived every person who trusted him with something real. I spent Friday preparing. Not my appearance, though I was not walking into that room looking like grief. I was preparing something else entirely, something that would make the moment undeniable and impossible to walk back. I wore a deep burgundy dress. My grandmother always said burgundy was the color of a woman who had decided something. Noel wore white. Because he was the truth made visible. I arrived at the Jade Garden at 1:47 on a Saturday afternoon. 112 guests filled that room, mostly Korean, business associates from Afri-Seoul's growing network, the extended Shin family circle. The kind of gathering where everyone is dressed as their best version of themselves and nobody expects anything to go wrong. I walked in with Noel in my arms and the document folder under my other arm. The first person who saw me was a woman near the entrance. She looked at me, then at Noel, then back at me, and something in her face rearranged itself. I kept walking. By the 3rd row, the recognition was moving through the room in a slow, visible wave, one person whispering to the next, heads turning, that particular hush that descends when something irreversible has begun. Afri-Seoul was at the front in a charcoal suit, speaking to someone beside him. He felt the change in the room before he turned. I watched his shoulders go still. Watched him turn. Our eyes met across 112 people and 5 years of a shared life and one baby I had named in silence at 5:01 in the morning. His face did something complicated in the span of 3 seconds. Shock and guilt and calculation moving through him all at once. He had always been fast like that. Processing. Managing. Constructing his next sentence before the current one finished. He had no next sentence for this. I walked to the front. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that. I did not scream or perform the undoing of a woman in crisis. I had been undone in private, in a hospital room, completely alone, on the worst morning of my life. I was not going to come apart here. I turned to face the room. My name is Josie Beck. I have been legally married to this man for 5 years. I held up the marriage certificate. Here is documentation of our joint accounts. Here is the birth record of our 6-month-old son, Noel Beck, whose father is the man standing at this altar. Complete silence. Then it broke. Shin Dae-won's voice cut through first. Low and controlled, the voice of a man who had built an empire by never losing his composure publicly. He spoke in Korean to the man beside him. 2 words I caught clearly. Step back. Walk away. Han was standing at the back in a pale gold wedding dress, quietly magnificent. I looked at her and she looked at me. Neither of us needed to speak. She already knew. She had known since the phone call. She was not watching a revelation. She was watching the confirmation of something she had already decided to survive. Her composure in that moment was the most dignified thing I had ever witnessed. Josie stepped toward me. He said my name. Just my name, like a question he didn't know how to finish. I looked at him. At this man who had called me Jagia in our kitchen on a Sunday morning. Who had smiled at me for 5 years. Who had not been there when his son was born and his other son died. Who had been laughing in a Seoul hospital room while I drove myself through contractions at 4 in the morning alone. And I felt something I had not expected to feel in that moment. Not hatred. Not triumph. I felt grief. Clean, clear, uncomplicated grief for the marriage I had believed in. For the version of us that had been real, at least in my experience of it, even if not in his. For the Sunday mornings with the doenjang jjigae and the cologne that smelled like the man I had chosen. He told himself he still had words that could reach me. He did not. I reached into the folder one last time. Took out the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. Held them out. Quietly, only for him, it is over, Josie. Nothing you say in the next 60 seconds will make it not over. The only thing left is your signature. He took the papers. His hands were not steady. I looked down at Noel. My son looked back at me with those wide, entirely unbothered eyes that babies carry before the world teaches them to be careful. He reached up and grabbed my necklace with his small fist, curious, unconcerned with everything surrounding him. I turned. And I walked out. What happened after I left that venue I heard through 3 separate sources across the following weeks. And what Shin Dae-won did to Juneseo's business interests in the 4 months that followed, I will tell you, not for the satisfaction of the telling, but because it is where the consequences became visible and permanent. Shin Dae-won dissolved every agreement he had with Juneseo. For deals. 3 countries. The Seoul property investment, the import partnership, the digital commerce agreement that had been 2 months from signing. All of it gone. The Shin family's name open rooms Juneseo could not enter without them. When those doors closed, they sealed. Hoon returned to Seoul without a statement. Her silence was its own verdict. Juneseo signed the divorce papers 6 weeks later. No meeting. No call. Just the papers returned through lawyers. I sat at my kitchen table in my cream-walled apartment and looked at those documents for a long time. I had done everything I had set out to do. He had nothing left of the life he had chosen instead of me. And I waited for what I thought I was going to feel. The relief. The lightness. The sense of something enormous lifting. It did not come. Not in the way I had imagined. What came instead was Noel's voice from the next room. Not words yet, just sounds, that particular babble babies make when they are awake and want you to know it. That sound that means I am here, I am alive, come and find me. I went to him. I picked him up. And then I did something I had not done since that hospital room. I cried. Not for Juneseo. Not from rage or bitterness or the thin taste of revenge. I cried for Eli. For my second son who had lived for 4 minutes and been held once and been named in silence. For the brother Noel would never know. For the grief I had spent 7 months outrunning by turning it into action and documentation and strategy. I cried for the woman who had driven herself to a hospital alone at 4 in the morning during contractions because her husband was in another country being someone else entirely. I cried for the Sunday mornings I had believed in. When there was nothing left to release, I wiped my face. Held Noel closer. He grabbed my necklace again, that small purposeful fist around the chain, and made a sound I decided to interpret as contentment. Outside my kitchen window the tree was doing what trees do in late October. Releasing. Not because it was finished with what it carried, but because it understood that letting go is not the same as losing. My grandmother called that evening. She always had a way of calling on the exact day when you needed the sound of her voice. How are you, baby? I think I am beginning to find out. A long, knowing silence. Then I made pepper soup today. The kind your grandfather always liked. I will teach Noel how to make it when he is old enough. He will need both recipes. Your pepper soup and his father's doenjang jjigae. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that boy is going to be something, Josie. He comes from women who survived things. I looked at Noelle, asleep now, that heavy, fully surrendered sleep of babies who have exhausted themselves at the business of being alive. He does, Grandma. He really does. I set the phone down and sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time. Somewhere Josie was living in the rubble of what he had chosen. I did not spend time imagining it. He was no longer a presence that required my imagination. Eli was 4 months gone and still everywhere. In the extra onesie I hadn't returned. In the second crib, still assembled in the corner of the bedroom because I wasn't ready to take it apart yet. In the way I sometimes caught myself looking at Noelle and feeling both complete and quietly hollowed by the shape of what was missing beside him. Grief does not resolve. It simply changes form. It moves from the kind that stops your breath to the kind that lives quietly in the background of ordinary moments and becomes part of the furniture of who you are. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in January, Noelle took his first steps. He had been pulling himself up on things for 2 weeks, then releasing and sitting down hard and studying the floor with an expression of absolute seriousness, as though working through a problem. That morning, he let go of the counter. Stood for 1 second. 2. 3. Then he walked. For unsteady, magnificent steps directly toward me. I caught him. He looked up at me with the specific, uncomplicated triumph of a person who has just discovered something entirely new about what they are capable of. And I held him, and I thought about everything it had taken to get us both to this kitchen. This ordinary Tuesday morning. These 4 steps. This exact, small, enormous moment. Before I give you the last part of this story, I need to pause right here and ask something of you. If this story has moved you, if Josie's journey has said something you needed to hear today, please subscribe to Afri-Seoul right now. Help this channel reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs it. This community grows 1 person at a time, and every single subscriber matters. Now, one final thing. Noelle was 13 months old when he said his first real word. Not mama, though that came eventually. His first real word was spoken clearly on a quiet Thursday afternoon in our apartment. He was looking at the framed photograph I kept on the shelf near the kitchen window. The one of me visibly pregnant, laughing at something my grandmother had said at a Sunday dinner. Looking at the shape of my belly in that photograph, at the presence inside it that had never made it home, he said. But, brother, not fully formed, but unmistakably directed at that photograph. At what was inside it. At the presence that existed in that image that had never made it out of the hospital. I went completely still. He said it again. But. Then he looked at me, and his face held that particular expression children carry when they have said something true that adults are not sure how to receive. Yes, baby. That's right. He seemed satisfied. Looked at the photograph for another moment, nodded as though something had been confirmed, then turned his attention back to the toy he had been pushing across the floor. I stood there and understood something I had not fully understood before that moment. Noelle was not going to grow up not knowing. I would tell him. When he had the words to hold the weight of it. When he was ready for the full truth of how he came into the world and what it cost. I would tell him about Eli. About that morning. About the 4 minutes. About the name I gave in silence. Because Eli existed. He was here. He was real. And no version of this story I told my son was ever going to pretend otherwise. My grandmother told me once that women like us carry our grief like luggage. We take it everywhere, she said, because nobody ever gave us a proper place to set it down. I have been learning, slowly, how to set it down. Not permanently. Not completely. But for longer stretches. I set it down when Noelle laughs that full, entirely unguarded laugh that belongs to no one else. I set it down when I make pepper soup on Sunday afternoons and the whole apartment fills with the smell of something that endures. I set it down when I watch the tree outside my kitchen window, the one that keeps releasing and releasing and releasing, and every spring comes back fuller than before. I did not walk out of that wedding feeling victorious. I walked out feeling finished. And finished, I have slowly come to understand, is its own kind of grace. Josie is somewhere in this world, rebuilding what can be rebuilt. I do not think about him often. Not because I have forgiven everything, forgiveness is its own slow, ongoing work, but because he stopped being the center of the story a long time ago. I am the center of the story. Noel is the center of the story. Eli, whose 4 minutes were as real as any lifetime, is the center of this story. This is not a story about revenge, though revenge lives inside it. This is not a story about survival, though survival runs through every line. This is a story about a woman who reached for her husband and found cold sheets, and then, slowly, deliberately, without applause or audience, reached for herself instead. And found, in her own hands, everything she actually needed. To every woman watching who has driven herself somewhere alone when she should not have had to, who has grieved in a room that did not make space for her grief, who has taken inventory in the dark and built something real from what she found there. This story is yours too. And if nobody has told you today that you are going to be okay, let me be that voice. You are going to be more than okay. You are going to be exactly, precisely, what you are already becoming.